Hey, what's up, everybody? In this next video, James and I will be discussing my fifth fight. It was my fight against Joe Estes and actually my first loss of my career. So you'll hear what I have to say about it. So check out the video.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Yamatodamashii podcast. My name is James, and of course, joined by Enson. And today we're looking back at Enson's career. It's been a while since we've done one of these episodes. The last one, if you remember, was his fight against Andre Manart. So what we're going to do is look at the next fight in that series, which was against Joe Estes. And so, Enson, the way I kind of wanted to kick off this episode was when we did the episode on Andre Manart. One of the things that you had said at the end of the episode, which was really, you had a change in mentality, right? You were gone 4-0. You had the confidence of beating what was an established K1 level striker, and also you felt that previously you've been testing the waters with MMA or NHB as it was known back then, and really you almost had this sort of felt a little bit obligated to continue fighting for Sayama, for the fans. But what you said was that after this fight, that sort of mentality had changed. So I guess I'm just curious to know sort of what changes did you make going into this fight?
Well, it was, I don't think that the changes in my training changed because I was always want to be the 100% prepared for the fights. But it's just the mindset of doing one more fight for somebody instead of doing getting a career and seeing how well I could do for myself. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't the funny thing is what's interesting is before this fight, my whole mindset changed to say that it wasn't a one fight deal anymore. It was a career that I was going to try and pursue to see what I could do. So I think that was the biggest change in the way I was looking at the career.
Mm-hmm. And it seemed like you made quite a lot of sacrifices as well, right? In the book, you talk about actually moving to EMEA, using your van as part of like an easier way of life of like spending more, so you can spend more time at the gym. Talk to me about that. Talk to me like how did you change up your routine?
Yeah, I had I devoted my whole day to training. So it was morning, evening, night. It was all training, no matter what. Everything revolved around training. So when I actually got the gym was connected to a health center, and the health center had a dorm for the workers. So what they did was they allowed me to have one of those rooms. I think it was like $300 a month only, but it was a 2-bedroom place. So it was super cheap, and I could stay there. So the only problem with that is Omiya, where my gym was, or the gym that I was training out of was the Sayama's gym. It was it's kind of off in the suburbs. So a lot of the training I did was in Ueno, in Shibuya, and all those places were really far away. So a lot of times, depending on when and what time I would have to commute, the traffic could make the commute at least 2 hours sometimes. So what happened with that is I decided that I had that cheap apartment, but to come home every night for the apartment, I was training 3 times a day, so it was so hard that I needed rest. And I felt like every time I got home and slept, and I had to get up early to make it in time for the next training. And considering traffic, I had to get up a little earlier. I just felt that commuting was time that I could use as sleep. So what I decided to do is I had a van. I remember that all the seats, the back seats would go flat. I had a futon over the flat seats. And voila, you had a bed. So I did that where I grabbed a lot of clothes. I would come back to Omiya about once every 5 days about, and everything would be done in the car. So I had my dog Shuto with me. So he was traveling with me all the time. And I would go into, say that night I had training at Watanabe Gym. Then I would if the morning I had a wrestling training at this Aoyama Gakuen in Shibuya, what I would do is I would, instead of coming all the way to Omiya, sleeping, and then coming all the way back in the morning, I'd go straight to Aoyama Gakuen, and then I'd find a nice place that I could park my car, and then I'd sleep until morning training. So I had so much time to sleep. After Aoyama training, if I were to go to Sunplay in Ueno to do weight training, I would go straight to Ueno, and then hopefully get a couple hours ahead, and then take a little nap in the car. Get my training done, go to Omiya to train. When I go to Omiya to spar, after it's done, instead of going home and sleeping, I would go to my next training in the morning. So if my next training was morning back in Ueno, I'd go straight to Ueno, because after the training in Omiya, it'd be a little late at night, like 10 at night. So there'd be no traffic. So my commute was cut in half. I'd go to Ueno, park the car somewhere nice, and fall asleep. Wake up 30 minutes before training, and got a lot of rest time. So that's actually what I did. So I bought a little thing with a shower. I would shower in the parks, sleep in the car. You know, me and Shuto be there, and it was pretty much living out of the car.
Yeah, that's so cool, especially the fact that like Shuto, like your best friend, kind of having him there and stuff. And it might, like, how, when you look back on those memories, do you look at them really fondly? The fact that obviously, you know, you had such a large career, you have so many sort of historic moments that we're going to break down over the podcast. But sometimes at the little things like that, where you actually can go back and say, like, do you miss those times at all?
I don't know if I miss it, but I do look back at it as a good memory.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the fact that I devoted everything to fighting, and everything was revolved around fighting. So, you know, at this point in my life now, there's a lot of other things that I do now. So, you know, I got the bracelets, I got the podcast, I got Sarah with me, I got training Tsuyoshi. So there's so much other things right now that I couldn't imagine doing that. And it is a nice memory to think that I actually, in that time of my life, I was in that area of my life that I had time to do something like that. I didn't have family here. I didn't have a girlfriend. I mean, the only obligation I had was Shuto, but he was with me. So, you know, it is also, you know, a good memory to think back. You know, some people look back at college and think about their college days, that they really had no worries about going into work. They had to just go to school and study, and, you know, go out at night, drink with the friends, go back in the morning, get to class, you know. So it's kind of like a life of very few responsibilities.
Yeah.
So it is a fond memory, and I do look back at it with a real good feeling.
Yeah, no, it's cool. It's just cool to hear you talk about it so positively. And, you know, I think the reason I ask is because these days you kind of, what seems to sell in some of like the MMA stories promoting fights is, oh, this person had such a hard struggle there. Whereas actually you look at it as like, yeah, it was challenging, but it was a real positive time as well. So it's great that you have such a positive outlook on it.
I guess, you know what the big thing about that is I chose to do that. It wasn't like some teacher told me you have to live in your car, you have to get to training, or you have to sleep. You know, it was something that I chose to do. So I guess with that, you know, I know, although there was some days that I suffered, I know it was hard sometimes. I think because I was the one who made those decisions, I think there's no animosity towards anybody. There's no hard feelings on anything. And although it did get hard sometimes, I really remember the good times.
Yeah, that's cool. So talk to me about Joe Estes. So how did Sayama come about, Joe? Do you know at all? Because obviously the big thing that everyone probably looks at when they go back and watch this fight is the weight difference. Even though you were sort of classed as a heavyweight, there's a good like 50 pounds between you guys.
Yeah, so Sayama was in touch with Matt Hume. And he's already had he had some fighters come in to fight in the light heavyweight from Matt Hume's gym. So Matt Hume had a little stable of fighters, and he contacted Matt Hume for a heavyweight fighter. And Joe Estes' name came up. Sam approached it with me. He was a lot bigger, but he's an ex-football player. So the only thing I knew about him is if he's an ex-football player. Usually football players have a lot of agility, really strong, very athletic. So I felt like even though he wasn't a legit MMA fighter or NHB fighter, I felt that his athletic abilities would probably make him a tough fight because he'd be 50 pounds heavier. So my whole life, I when I was in Hawaii and the street fights we would get into, because I'm Japanese, I'd be like the smallest guy anyway. So I took pride in being the small guy knocking down the big people. So for me, got into the sport not become the champion of a weight division. I came into the sport to find out if I'm one of the toughest guys in the world. So if you're gonna compare yourself to be the toughest guy in the world, you're not gonna put a weight limit on it. So that's why, because I was borderline, I could actually probably drop weight to 93 kilos and make it to the light heavyweight. I opted to be in the heavyweight. I knew I was going to be fighting people that were way bigger than me, but that's the way I wanted to do it. You get a light heavyweight champion, you get a heavyweight champion, they fight. Most of the times, the bigger guys, the good bigger guy is going to beat a good little guy. So I decided to stay in the heavyweights. And yeah, when I found out he was 50 kilos over, I thought, man, that's for me. I wasn't picking fighters to beat. I didn't think I was going to beat fighters. I thought I wanted to pick fighters that was going to be hard. And Joe seemed like a opponent that would be a problem.
Yeah, it's I think it's a sort of trademark of your career, to be fair, finding the biggest dog in the yard and challenging them. And
yeah.
When you talk about big dogs, Joe is huge. So from as soon as the fight starts, the stare down was pretty intense. What was going through your head when Joe was sort of eyeballing you?
Well, what was going through my head was I felt I was an MMA fighter, and I felt he was a football player trying to be an MMA fighter. And I just felt like, this big football player is coming in the ring thinking that he's going to intimidate me because of his size. And I felt looking back at him, look, I mean, the thing that was going through my head was, okay, we'll see. We'll see real soon how strong a football player is. So I had this little MMA fighter against football player. So, I had this little, I guess, chip on my shoulder that this guy's coming into MMA ring and thinking he's going to beat a guy because he's bigger.
Mm-hmm. And then the actual fight, one of the things that's kind of evident is, like, initially he's sort of going for the takedown, but it looked like you intentionally sort of brought him into your guard. Was that part of the strategy to sort of try and get him in that position?
No, actually the strategy was to, of course, get him to the ground. And of course, the best position to be on the ground is be on top. But I was still more considered a jiu-jitsu fighter. And back in the day in jiu-jitsu, we were taught that the guard position was a good position. Yeah, we were taught that from the bottom, you're in an advantageous position because you could armbar, you could sweep, you could choke, and the guy in the guard had to watch for armbars. He could strike you from the top, but in jiu-jitsu, there's no striking. So if you're doing pure jiu-jitsu, the guy on the ground probably has a more advantage and more chances of submitting you. So back in the day, in the old school jiu-jitsu, we were taught that the guard position, to put someone in your guard, although you're on the bottom, is a very advantageous position. So I know MMA is different. I know I had to, I knew that I could get hit from the top. So maybe it's not a very good idea, but I still had that instinct of pulling people to my guard. And I had a very good guard. So I had confidence in my guard. So yeah, it wasn't like an outright strategy, but I felt really comfortable on the bottom. So whenever I get any type of balance problem or I feel like I'm having a hard time getting onto the top, I'll pull them into my guard. So that's what I did.
And you had such a good track record, right, of subbing guys at that point as well. So it was kind of, I could see that's where you'd have a lot of confidence going to the ground with him. What was your immediate thoughts though when you did have him in his guard and you felt maybe that he was trying to, like, nullify your attacks? And how does that affect a fighter's mentality being in that position?
Well, I had a good guard, so I knew I had all different types of attacks. So I was about to try some of them, but I remember something very distinctive was Matt Hume is a very good trainer. He's a very good coach. And I remember whenever I tried to do something, I would hear Matt Hume negate it. If I was trying to get an armbar, he would tell Joe Estes to move over to that side so I can't get that armbar. Every time, I mean, almost like Matt was reading my mind. Every time I thought of doing this, I heard him in the corner tell Joe, "Hey, Joe, watch your arm, watch your arm." I'm like, "Oh, fuck, he knows what I'm doing." I felt really discouraged. I felt like, man, and Joe, I think technically Joe himself didn't have the technique to defend himself or actually be a solid NHB fighter. But with his athletic ability, his strength, and the brains of Matt Hughes giving him directions, he was. I couldn't break his guards. I couldn't break his defenses. So it was really frustrating because Matt Hume knew everything. He almost like knew what I was going to do and warned him ahead of time, and he avoided it all. So you know, the fight ended up where I couldn't sweep him, I couldn't get him out of my guard, I couldn't armbar him, and he just stayed on top in a more advantageous position in the eyes of the judges, and just landed little punches here and there, enough to mark my face up and enough to take the fight.
Yeah, it's you can actually, if you watch the fight back, you can hear Matt Hume in the corner, because what we talked about before, how the Japanese crowd is so quiet just watching the fight. You can actually hear Matt in the background. But for those that don't know Matt Hume, he also trained Demetrius Johnson for quite a long time. So at one point was really, really, really well renowned when DJ was one of the best in the world. So the obviously the fight pays out. One of the things I sort of had thinking as I was watching the fight was, back in the day, especially in this era, referees didn't stand fights up as much as they do now. As soon as sometimes the action gets a bit dull, usually referee will stand them up on their feet. Back in that day, that just didn't really happen as much, especially not in an organization like Shooter, where you sort of let the guys sort of work it out. Maybe it's sort of dwelling on history a bit, but do you think the fight would have gone quite a lot differently if it was sort of under those sorts of standards?
Yeah, we would have definitely been stood up more often. There would have been more of a striking exchange. I'm not saying that I would have been able to win the fight, but I know it would be a little different because he wouldn't have just controlled me on the ground. So,
yeah,
maybe I would have lost because my strength was the ground. So if we had to stand all the time where I wasn't too comfortable at the time, it might not have been good for me. So,
yeah.
damn if you do, damn if you don't. Maybe it would have been better. Maybe it would have been worse, but it didn't happen. So that's the way it was. So.
Yeah. It's you can't really like play that game anyway. Do you know what I mean? Like looking back on it. But
yeah.
The good thing with this fight is, though, you got to avenge the loss. But spoiler alert for anyone that doesn't know. So when the judges read the scorecards on the fight, what was going through your head as they were doing that? Because obviously one judge actually scored it for you in your favor, and Joe actually got the majority decision. What at the immediate time of them reading the decision, what was your feelings coming out of the fight?
I thought I lost. So I mean, I don't think I even remember right off the bat. I couldn't say that it was. I didn't think it was a split decision, majority decision, because I just felt I lost, and I don't think one of the judges having me winning got me excited at all, because I just felt I lost. So the whole thing was, my first big feeling was, shit, I let Sayama down. Of course I did let myself down, but Sayama had so much hopes for me. I felt like I let him down. That was my first initial feelings after the fight.
Yeah, you can see that immediately. I think Sayama's around the ringside, and then you go and sort of you bow to him while he's on the outside. So, and then you obviously like bow to the fans as well. So it kind of seemed like you were really sort of almost felt bad when you shouldn't, right? It was just a loss, but you definitely seemed like it that was really important to you as well. Not just that you were fighting for yourself, but fighting for others.
Yeah, it was. It was really important for me to win that. I just felt that there were so many people that were, I guess with the 4 wins in a row, a lot of the people in Japan had these big hopes of a Japanese fighter, hopeful. And I started, feeling that momentum. And I just felt like I just, boom, stopped that momentum. Like, oh shit, I'm freaking sorry, man.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about this on the last podcast about sort of how sometimes the fans are with you and sometimes they're not. How was it? Did you feel that sort of straight after the fight? Did you feel like the fans kind of didn't think you were as, maybe not as hot on you as they were before? Or did you feel like it didn't waver?
No, I don't think I wavered at all. I didn't feel like there was any waver. The fans still supported me as much as they did. I didn't feel any betrayal at all. Nowadays I think it's a lot different, yeah, because a lot of the fighters will be like a lot of people cheering for them. As soon as they lose something, all of a sudden the fighters are like dishing them and just getting on him and kicking him when he's down. So I just think that I don't know, maybe it's just the way the whole sport was. It was more of a martial art than a sport. That the fans were a little bit more, I don't know how to word it, like more loyal to you, yeah.
Like maybe, I don't know, MMA was so sort of experimental back then that fans kind of accepted losses as just part of it, part of the game. But yeah, definitely, it's a bit of a sad thing about these days, right?
I remember too, after the fight, one of my biggest things that I felt for myself was I just felt that I just felt overpowered. I just felt that Joe overpowered me. I mean, of course, Matt Hume was there helping him negate all my attacks. But my biggest feeling was, damn, I gotta get stronger. So it's so funny because a whole different mentality, yeah, because a lot of people, if they were overpowered in a weight class that they shouldn't have been in, they would have thought of dropping down to a lighter weight class.
Yeah, right.
But I was here thinking, hell, shit, I got to put on more muscle. I got to put on more weight. And that's when I really went harder into weight training and eating more and trying, every time I trained, I always lost weight. I never could keep weight. I wish I had that problem now, but, back then it's like trying to keep the weight on, which is incredible, So I just decided to, I never did take protein, but at that time, creatine was really big. So I started going on creatine and protein, and I started lifting more and starting to lift more heavy weights instead of lighter weights. And I slowly started putting on muscle. And if you can tell from my fights, you could see there's a little. So the most I could actually do was like 5 pounds a year.
Wow.
Okay. Really good muscle. Yeah. So, I mean, I wish it could have been faster, but I guess when you're legitimately doing it naturally, it's super hard. So like 5 pounds a year, but I really did feel the power coming up and I really felt stronger. So, that fight was a real big crossroads in my career, is when I decided that I had to get stronger. I had to add more weight training into my regimen.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting that you kept your mentality of wanting to be the best in the world never wavered, because like you say, you could have chose to go down a division. Shuto had quite they had a big, quite light heavyweight. I think the card was headlined by a light heavyweight title fight.
It might have been. Yeah, I think Eric Paulson. Yeah,
Eric Paulson. Was headlining it. So you had options. Did Sayama ever try and say, or would you want to go? After that, did he?
No, this funny thing is Sayama never said anything to me about it. He left it up to me, and he knew from the beginning I wanted to fight heavyweights. So he's never questioned it, and he just supported what I did. And I just 50 pounds is a lot of weight.
Yeah.
But I didn't. It's funny because the timing of my mind change and my mindset about my career was perfect. Because if I was fighting just for someone else and being that overpowered by someone that much bigger than me and knowing that I was planning to fight heavyweights, I mean, I almost think that if I still was in the mindset of I'm just fighting for Sayama to, all this time he spent, make it worthwhile for him, I don't know if I would have continued. That would have been just like, okay, oh shit, I got beat. I got the experience in the ring. Good. I'm not made for this. They're too big. They're too strong and done. But I think the big thing was that I had my whole mindset changed. That, okay, I've committed myself to see how good I can be and compared to the best fighters in the world. So that helped, man, because it wasn't like a real shallow thing. Like, oh, okay, now I'll try my career. No, it was pretty much a serious thought. Okay, I'm going to try and be the best in the world and see what I can do fighting the best fighters in the world. And, one little setback isn't something that would discourage me from continuing on my, my little goal that I'm trying to do. But if I'm fighting for somebody else, that setback could be heavy enough to say, okay, I tried it, I'm done, but I'm in a way it's lucky. I'm lucky that the timing. My whole life is like that. My whole life is about good timing and a lot of luck, and that was a lot of luck. That whole mindset change happened right before this fight.
So, what the final thing I wanted to ask you about this, and you've kind of given it such good perspective that I think the answer is probably kind of obvious. But losses like that, do you dwell on it much? I mean, as a fight, you kind of get different impressions from different fighters about how much they think about losses, and some people think like, oh, if I just did this or I just did that. To me, you've never come across as that guy, but just in your own words, like how much do you think about like losses and first losses and things like that?
When I first lose the rank, they lost. My whole objective is to review the fight. Review the fight. Well, at the time, Egan was helping me, so I would review the fight, go over with Egan what I did wrong, make sure I correct the things I did wrong, work on the technique to get whatever I did a lot more smoother, so I won't get caught next time in making that mistake or missing the armbar or missing the sweep. We went over a lot of things that I could possibly do in that position if I do fight him again. So my whole process after a loss was I not necessarily dwelled on it. I dwelled on it to a point where I went to watch it. Once I went to watch it, we figured out the points that I could change, the things I could correct, or maybe some things I need to add to my repertoire. And pretty much that after that was done and I worked on it, I had confidence in what I was working on and what I was doing. And, I didn't dwell on it at all because, I always say in my seminars, wins and losses are something that you can't control. And wins and losses are not something that you determine in the ring. It's not, I didn't win because my hand is raised in the ring at the end of the fight. And I didn't win because my hand wasn't raised. I didn't lose. Superficially, yes. That's how they determine wins and losses. But when you're spiritually and you're talking of longevity of a career, the best victory that you can get in the ring is to get better for the next fight. And if a loss is what it takes to make you a better fighter, that's a victory. So I always thought that, okay, I would love to get my hand raised in the beginning and at the end of the fight, but if I don't, it's still not a loss. We're going to have to see what happens in the next fight. So when my hand wasn't raised in Joe Estes' fight, for a lot of superficial people and people are just looking at fight records, I lost that fight. But then for me, it was like, okay, now I got to go back home, get to the drawing board, study the fight, train, and let's see what happens. See if the end of this fight was a victory or a loss. And I believe if you can step in a better fighter after the fight, it could be, it doesn't matter that a loss, the guy you getting a L on your record could actually be a victory.
And just
so I guess,
sorry.
Yeah, with that mindset of, losses aren't something necessarily bad. Losses actually could be some of the best things for your career at a certain point of time. So, with that mindset, I don't dwell on it because losing isn't, if it's a good thing, you're not going to dwell on it like it's something negative.
And just to tie it in with some of the stuff you got going on right now, obviously Tsuyoshi's coming off his first loss. Are these the sorts of things that you've been sharing with him and that sort of that insight and trying to get him to focus on learning from the last fight?
Yeah, it is. And it's a real fine line that I have to walk because I also got to realize that Tsuyoshi's not the same type of fighter as me. He's more of a sportsman than a martial artist. The fact that he tapped in the ring shows you that, he's not, although he likes to think he is, he's not someone that's fighting to and willing to die in the ring. So with my mindset, I have to, it's hard for me because I have to think about it and control it and think, okay, I can't tell him exactly what I would tell him if I was myself because he's not the type of fighter that I am. So I have to think of what I would have to do and change some of the words, change some of the ways we're going to work on him in a way that's going to, be advantageous to a sportsman. So that's a little bit tricky for me. And I think that's where I get to learn as a coach.
Oh, that's interesting. Great. Well, I think that sort of wraps up this episode. It was really, really insightful as always, just to hear sort of your perspective of like something as big as your first loss and how you deal with it and how you come off of it. And hopefully, if other fighters watch this, it'll be beneficial to them as well. I think it really would be. Any parting words before we finish this episode?
Yeah, just I'd love to change the mind of people about wins and losses. You never go in to win or lose, because I always say winning and losing is something that you cannot control. It's like a dog walking down the street, and when he crosses over this certain line on the street, he has to make sure his tail is on the left side or the right side. It's like it's either going to be on the left or the right, and you're not going to ever know if it's going to be on the left or the right. It's something that you cannot control, so why stress out about it? When you fight, someone's going to win and someone's going to lose. And you can train hard to try and make sure that you win, but there's no guarantee. So why stress about it? So I always emphasize in my seminars that wins and losses, this is something that you cannot control. So don't dwell on something that you cannot control. What you should dwell on and concentrate on is giving 100%, giving everything you got in the ring. And what you can't control is if you're 100% that day might give you a victory. I mean, might have your hand raised in the ring, or might have your hand not raised in the ring. So, a big point I always have is, concentrate on what you can control, and that's giving 100% to the very end. That's all.
Awesome. For real. All right, everybody. Well, on that note, I want to thank everyone for watching, and we'll be back soon.